Okay, let's get underway. Welcome, everybody. Again, we welcome you to put to introduce yourselves to each other in the chat room. And during the course of the call today, feel free to also converse in the chat room. If an idea sparks you, please do use that facility. Today, we're going to have a conversation about leadership and community impact, and very pleased to be joined with my colleague, Danya Pastuszek, who is the brand new co-CEO at Tamarack. But before we get into the conversation, I want to welcome my other colleague, Grace, onto the call to provide us with a little bit of technical information. So over to you, Grace.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace. I'm going to provide some technical support for you all today. I'm coming in from Waterloo. Just wanted to go over some reminders. So the first one is, we've got you covered. You will receive a full recording of the call. That includes the slides as well as a collection of lists and resources. Feel free, just as Liz mentioned, join the conversation. Use the Q&A panel on your Zoom to submit or to vote for questions that you'd like us to discuss. And then the other aspect is that you can use the chat panel to ask for technical support throughout the webinar as well. I will pass it back to Liz.
Yeah, and if you do require any technical support, please do reach out to Grace directly or to our other colleague, Connor, who's also joining us on this call. And so if you get bumped out or you can't use one of the functions, please do text them directly through the Zoom client. Thank you so much, Grace. I want to begin with land acknowledgement. This is something that we do at Tamarack and is really important to us as part of the work that we're doing as an organization to deepen our collective knowledge and understanding of equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and reconciliation. And so we want to begin this workshop by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. And for those of us that are settlers on this land, we're really grateful for the opportunity to meet, and we want to thank the generations of Indigenous peoples who have stewarded and taken care of this land. And I personally am joining you from the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. It's also the land that was covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. And that covenant was a covenant between Indigenous nations to care for and steward the lands around the Great Lakes. And the dish is the Great Lakes, and the one spoon is the fact that all of us receive benefits from being and living around the Great Lakes. And so it's a nice reminder to me about the land and the heritage that has been part of the history of Canada. And so wanted to acknowledge that. And we welcome you in the chat box to share the lands that you're joining us from. And Danya, you already shared that you're joining us from the lands of the Algonquin people. So thank you for that. It's a webinar today with Danya Pastuszek, as I already mentioned, and Danya has just joined us as a co-CEO at Tamarack, and so my new colleague, but also a colleague to all the other team members within the Tamarack team. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Danya's background, just so that you can learn a little bit about her. So, as I mentioned, she's the co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute, and her particular area of focus is Director of Vibrant Communities Canada. Danya joins the Tamarack Institute from the United Way of Salt Lake, where she worked for 10 years helping lead the organization's collective impact transformation and the development of the Promise Partnership, a regional cross-sector partnership comprised of many place-based cradle-to-career initiatives. She served most recently as the Chief Operating Officer for the United Way of Salt Lake. Danya assumes the leadership role from Paul Bourne, who was is the founder and former co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute since its inception in 2001. Danya has served in senior leadership positions centered on, and this is a big long list, Danya, centered on strategic planning and learning, data analytics and continuous improvement, operations, resource development, and partnership building. Over the course of her career, Danya has focused on the advancement and educational attainment of youth, workforce readiness and development, immigrant and refugee services, and health. And so you can see why Tamarack is so excited to have Danya on board, and particularly leading our vibrant communities part of the organization. You bring such a wealth of experience and connections and knowledge of this work to Tamarack. And so we're really excited, Danya, to welcome you.
Thanks, Liz.
Great. Hey, so before we go too far and ask you a little bit more about yourself and a series of questions, we thought we would see who was in our virtual room. And so we have a poll that we've put together. And we'd love to know from you in this poll what the focus of your work is. And I think this will really ground us in, who is in our virtual room. So you can see the poll is open. If you work at ending poverty, we'd love to know that, building stronger neighborhoods, supporting young people, navigating climate transitions. Those are some core focuses at Tamarack, but also, supporting immigrants and newcomers, supporting children and families, addressing mental health issues, addressing housing and homelessness, or if you're focused on another area. We're going to give you a few minutes to fill in the poll, and then we'll see who's joined us today. So I can see that we're about 67% in terms of the number of people that have participated in the poll so far. We'll give you maybe another quick minute to let us know where you're from and what your work is focused on. One of the things, Danya, that we recognize at Tamarack is that even though we're asking people to pick one of these, it's probably likely that many of the folks that are on the call do work in multiple areas. They might be ending poverty, but also addressing housing and homeless issues in their community, or supporting immigrants and refugees. That's the thing about this work, is that we often have multiple priorities that our organizations are advancing. And so we know we're asking you to say one, but we know that the reality is that you could probably go many of the above. We didn't put that as an option. Thanks so much, everybody. We're going to close the poll here, and we're going to share our results. So Danya, as you can see from the results, we've got a nice mix right across the board of folks that are joining us, that are bringing different ideas, different perspectives, different focuses to their work. We've got 28% of the folks are working on building stronger neighborhoods. And then a couple of other really big groups are supporting children and families, addressing health and mental health issues, and then others that might be working on multiple priorities or another priority.
Super neat to see in the chat as well some other ideas that are coming up for folks as they think about their current focus areas too.
Yeah, it's such an interesting way to understand, who has joined us, and feel free to continue to share in the chat your other areas. And then what we might be able to do is improve this poll on future calls, so that we get a sense of, the folks in the room. Hey, so let's start into our conversation. So we've learned about your previous work in the introduction, but only a snippet. what are one or two things that you would like to share with our listeners so that they could get to know you on a more personal or a more kind of intimate level?
Well, okay, before I answer that, Liz, I just have to say again, for those who didn't hear me say this at the beginning, just thank you for sharing this space with me. For those of you who don't know Liz very well, you have to know she is one of the hardest working, most honest, most accountable leaders that I've ever met. I've been following her contributions to community-wide change, to digital innovation, to shared leadership, to governance for over a decade. And Liz, I still can't quite believe that we're this team now. So thank you. All right, so 1 to 2 things that I'd like to share about myself as a person. First off, I'm a white settler on this land. I'm an immigrant to Canada, and I want you to know about some of the amazing women in my life and about my nascent relationship to Canada. So I grew up in the US. I grew up in Boston and San Francisco and New York City and Salt Lake City. And I came to Pembroke, Ontario, basically sight unseen, because I believe that what defines a home is the people that you hold dear. I met my now husband in New York. He came to Ontario as a refugee with his parents and his sister from Poland in 1984. And along with my mother, my grandparents, my aunts, my mother-in-law is a family member who I respect really deeply. In 1995, at a time when the financial services industry had very few female leaders and even fewer female immigrant leaders, she started a financial advising office here in Pembroke. And over 20 years, she grew that business substantially. She showed that financial advising is not just for English as a first language men, and she helped hundreds of families send kids to college, buy homes, retire, and reach other goals. What's more, when she was ready to explore other passions, she asked her son, my husband, to succeed her in her business. That offering, combined with my husband and my desire to experience a new country, is what brought us from Salt Lake City to Renfrew County, Ontario. It's also what's offered me an experience that millions of other Canadians have as well, one of moving to a new country where the systems and the people and the culture and where things are located and so many other things are just also new. The second thing I want to share is about what gives me joy. For the longest time, I think if you'd asked me what made me smile when things seemed really grim, I wouldn't have really known what to say. And then I had this memory. It was the summer of 2019. It was a really hot day, and the song Happy by Pharrell came on. Does anyone know that song? Let us know in the chat if you do. It's a lovely song. And I found myself getting up and I started dancing with my son. He was 18 months old at the time. And I realized in that moment that what brings me joy is movement. So today I run or I bike or I jog or something every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes. And I try to get my 2 little boys to have dance parties with me after dinner. I take little breaks during the workday to stretch for a few seconds or just to walk to the end of the driveway, often in my socks because I forget to put my shoes on. And when I feel anxious or stressed or lonely or sad, I try to get up. So I'm sure that the things that bring each of us joy are different and would love to see more chatter on what those things are if you're willing and interested in sharing with our group here. But what I've learned is that it's really important to know what they are. Having even a little moment of joy on a hard day at a hard moment is really important, especially when we're in this work that puts us accountable to really questioning what we think we know, to changing systems, to doing new things together, often without real authority to do so.
Thank you. That was lovely to learn a little bit more about you and about your family connections as well, and what brings you joy. I walk my dog in the morning before I start my work day, and it's such a lovely time of year because you see the ribbon of pink in the sky in the morning, or at least I do on my walk. And I just think to myself, every time I see that, I think about how awesome nature is, right? And then, of course, that saying that everybody knows, right? Red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. And I think, oh, what kind of day are we going to have? So yeah, little moments of joy, I think, are so important. Let's go on to our next question. And so you joined us from the United Way of Salt Lake, where you were really engaged in advancing educational outcomes for young people. So tell us a little bit about that work, and then how do you see it maybe connected to some of the work that is happening at Tamarack?
So I learned about United Way of Salt Lake from a person I knew when I worked at the International Rescue Committee and Refugee Resettlement. His name is Patrick Pullen. He's an amazing human. At the time, I thought that United Ways raised money from companies and then gave them back as grants to nonprofits. And Salt Lake was so different. What I learned when I started to learn about the organization was what you said, Liz. It's an organization solely focused on building and supporting cross-sector partnerships that are accountable to equitable health and education outcomes. I spent a decade there. I learned a whole lot of things. Some of the folks that I know here on the call with me were with me when I did that learning. And thank you for being here and thank you for doing that learning with me. But I'll just mention 3 things here. So the first thing I learned that I want to share is that I think you have to believe. I think really transformational changes are really hard. They can take a really long time. The progress isn't always visible, and I've never seen it be linear. I think you have to believe that change is possible within the time frame that we as individual humans will experience. I think that authentic optimism is a form of leadership, of partnership, of lasting change. And I don't know how I could do this work if I didn't deeply believe that a more just world was possible. If I didn't deeply believe that the solutions are already known in communities, if I didn't deeply believe in my own capacity and the capacity of other people who hold power around me to recognize our privileges and share power and admit when we failed and then try to fail forward and learn. The second is related. It's about population accountability. Some of you likely know Dr. Michael McAfee, the president and CEO of PolicyLink. He's another person I deeply respect in this work. And he taught me about knowing your numbers. What I take from that expression is that to contribute to community-wide change, to population level changes, you have to be in relationship with the population. I'm now accountable to supporting Tamarack's 4 vibrant communities, Liz, as you mentioned. These are community level partnerships that are committed to youth futures, to climate transitions, to strong neighborhoods, and to the elimination of poverty. This work spans 127 communities and millions of community members. It's important that I know those numbers because knowing them helps me to ensure that my specific contributions are at the right scale. I've learned that to get to the real deep roots of inequity, to figure out what will catalyze transformational change, I have to know who I'm working with and the scale of the opportunity in front of us. The third thing I'll say is that I think when you're in a role of coordinating or catalyzing or backboning community-wide efforts, as some of us here are, a flexible framework for how you do that work really helps. Communities focused on community-wide change are learning amazing things. They're going through really innovative processes. We should make these processes visible. We should leverage communities' work so that it's shaping the path for others. We should have continuously evolving hypotheses on the stages the partnerships go through to achieve community-wide change. Strive Together's theory of action, Tamarack's membership tracking tools, PolicyLink's corporate performance standards on racial equity are all really amazing examples of these kinds of flexible frameworks that I think can guide this work. The fourth thing I'll say is that I've learned that tensions in partnership work are totally inevitable. And Liz, you and I were just talking about this, it occurs to me. Some tensions can be really caustic, but a lot of tensions are really productive. Earlier in my work life, I think I was one of those people who thought that we should try to eliminate tensions, who thought that we should be nice and we should be polite. What I've learned is that I don't actually want to eliminate all tension. I want to understand the impact of those tensions. Are they wearing us down and creating divisions? Or are they prompting us to challenge our assumptions and consider different options and engage new perspectives and ultimately create more beautiful and community-centered approaches? If it's the latter, I really want to lean into those tensions. I want to slow down, name them, figure out why they exist, and talk about what we can learn from them, while reminding ourselves that whatever result we're after should really be guided by who has the essential expertise. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, I promise, is that I've learned that partnership-based results-focused equity work can change how you interact with all people and think about all the issues that you come up against in life. In supporting partnerships, I have learned how to ask better questions, how to listen more deeply, how to summarize what I'm hearing and then share it back, how to be told I'm wrong and to treat that as a gift, how to be open-minded. The work has made me a different kind of daughter and parent and spouse and friend and neighbor. It's made me different in terms of how I interact when I'm waiting in a really long line at the grocery store and I'm running late and I just want to be back in the car with my groceries, having paid. And it's made me different when I interact with people who vote differently or who vaccinate differently than I do. It's made me kinder and more empathetic and less urgent, I'd say.
Thank you for that. I mean, that's a really amazing list, right? Having the belief and really kind of knowing how data and people are so important. And if we want to get to population level change, and then thinking about it from the terms of flexible frameworks and, tension. I often refer to tension. So I think you're absolutely right about that. I want to acknowledge Mallory. I saw your hand come up, and I wonder, Mallory, if you have a question, if you put it either into the chat box or into the Q&A client, we're happy to. We have a period of questions at the very end, and we'll circle back to your question. But if it's something you really want to remember, please do that, and we will circle back. Or I can ask Grace to pull it out of the chat box, and maybe we'll do one more conversation, Danya, and then go back to that question that Mallory raised. So this question is about balance, right? And you mentioned in the previous answer that you were talking about building partnerships and, how important that was. And so how did you balance that? Because there is, the partnership building of it. That's one part of the tension, and the getting the work done, right? I often refer to it as a process product tension. And so what did you do to kind of navigate that?
I love this question. This is a really good and tough question. If others have thoughts on it as we're talking here, please throw the responses in the chat, because it would be wonderful to learn your perspectives on this as well. What I'll say is that I try to make the three types of work be the same work. In my last job, we changed our organizational vision statement to be the partnerships vision statement. We changed the tools and the frameworks that we use so that we were using internally the same tools that we were using to facilitate our outcomes-focused partnerships. These were tools from results-based facilitation, results-based accountability, liberatory design. We made these our core tools internally. I see that same approach here at Tamarack, Liz. In the 2030 strategic plan that many of you who are here on the call today likely had a hand in, we talk about an organizational vision that is the same as the vision for what we want with our learners and our members. We take the amazing tools that the Learning Center is developing and using with our learners, and we apply them to how we design board meetings and analyze the impact of our work internally and apply an equity lens to our organization. So in terms of advice I have for folks trying to get day-to-day organizational work done while also focusing on achieving impact in a partnership, I guess my advice would be that we can only do so much. When I worked in direct services as a participant at collaborative tables, I tried to avoid having the day-to-day work I was accountable for be different than the work of designing and implementing strategies within a partnership. I tried to push instead to have my day-to-day work be exactly the same as the partnership work. I just wonder so much about the world we could create if we all focused our organizational vision statements and corresponding plans toward population level results. If we all elevated population level results that we contribute to at the same level that we elevate our organizational results, the ones that we have more direct control over. That's my thought.
Yeah, no, that's a really great way of thinking about the work. Is this really kind of the integration, right? So it doesn't feel like it's separate work, that we're doing our organizational work over here and, our partnership work over here, but that, it actually is all together and all seamless. Lovely. Yeah. So let's go on. This webinar is about leadership and about the mindsets and skill sets of leadership. And so, one of the areas of practice at Tamarack is around collaborative leadership. And so what for you do you think are some of those you know, those either mindsets that you have or some of the skills that you think are really important to collaborative leadership?
I love how you frame this question. I love how you included mindsets. I keep this little visual of, you probably can't see it, but the levers.
Yeah, if you bring it close, we can.
Okay, well, I won't bring it too close because my handwriting is quite messy, but
okay.
I keep this visual of the levers of systems change there. I keep it above my desk here. And it reminds me that the policies and resource flows and practices and skills are just pieces of systems change. Transformational change, I found, so often starts with our mental models, with our mindsets, with how we see people and how we see the world that we're in. As I mentioned a minute ago, the results count framework that Annie E. Casey Foundation originally developed has really shaped how I think about essential leadership mindsets for leaders working toward goals that no one organization could achieve alone. I also think about a year-long project that I worked on a couple of years ago to understand the competencies of collaborative leaders in my Salt Lake context specifically. And I say that just so that if you know the results count framework, or you were involved in that Salt Lake work, you'll see the similarities between that and what I offer. The first mindset I think about is understanding who you are, what your role is, and what your system is. I think it's essential to understand what has shaped you, why you choose the work that you do choose, and what your values and your attitudes and your preferences are. Know yourself, know your role, and how it specifically contributes to community-wide change. Know the ecosystems you're a part of. Take time to reflect on how you want to contribute to a collaborative, given who you are and what you're passionate about, given the positionality that you have, and given where and with whom and for whom you're doing the work. The second mindset that I think about is to be results-based and data-driven. In doing collaborative work, I think it really helps to focus efforts and keep people engaged when we start with a shared result and we start with an understanding of the gap between where we are and where we want to be. Last year, I worked on a racial equity roadmap. The process was oriented around a set of results. We decided that we wanted to eliminate the racialized disparities in specific educational outcomes, cradle to career at a regional level. We wanted all of our partnerships to be co-led by individuals with lived experience. We wanted our strategies to be targeted toward groups most negatively impacted by current systems. Once we affirmed those results and how we'd measure progress on them using a mix of administrative data and data about people's experiences, the planning process anchored around those. The third mindset is, it feels funny to use collaboration in a question about collaboration, but it is around collaboration, really authentic collaboration with people who have preferences and experiences that are different from my own. My time in this work has shown me that conversations are where things get done. I think when we hold the mindset that we want to understand the values and beliefs and behaviors of those around us, I think when we're open to different things and willing to adapt our own beliefs and approaches, that's the foundation to do new things, to do brave things. It's reminded me the value in broadening my circle of collaborators and thought partners. I love the results-based facilitation framework, which I try to use to contribute to meetings that are clear in the results, that welcome everyone in, that recognize power dynamics and use them intentionally, that are filled with great questions, that make meaning of what's shared, and that end with clarity on who will do what next. The last thing, the last mindset I'll allude to circles back to this idea of belief. When I think about all the collaborative leaders who have shaped me, they all believe that transformational change was possible through collaborative partnerships. They believed that the community held solutions. They believed that they could contribute to change. They believed that reforming any system, achieving any condition of community well-being requires sustained partnership across seemingly unrelated people and movements and efforts, because the factors impacting, let's say, climate change are many of the same ones that also impact housing, education, health, mental health, and so many other issues, to go back to our opening poll that we did in conversation that we had around the intersectionality of so many of these topics. So those are my 4 mindsets for now. Know who you are and know your context, know your results and how you'll understand your progress toward them, invest in conversations, and believe that it can be done through unusual partnerships. Liz, you have done so much work in this space. What do you consider to be the essential leadership mindsets and skill sets for leaders working toward collaborative goals?
Yeah, I carry many of the ones that you have mentioned. The ones that I might add to the ones that you mentioned already are, I think there's a thing about curiosity that I think is really important, to be curious. And when you are curious, you're also a learner. I think you go into the space of, I'm curious about that. I want to learn more about that. I don't feel like I have all the answers. So when you're curious, you don't have all the answers, and you recognize that other people have things that will really contribute to your knowledge and your skill sets. And then the other thing that I think about a lot in the collaborative leadership space is that context is so important. And you mentioned context, but I think about context from a community perspective as well, that despite our best efforts, one size does not fit all. And you talked about this earlier when you talked about flexible frameworks. I really want to know what is the context of that community and how ready are they, and those are the kind of questions that I often will ask myself about organizations or about communities when engaging with them. So, and then the final thing, there's like 3 C's. The final thing that I think about a lot is like courage, because I do think, and these are all mindsets, right? Courage is, it's the courage to say, hey, we're not as good as we could be, or we haven't achieved the results that we should, or the courage to say that, despite our best efforts, people and children are being left behind, right? And so why is that? And what can we do to shift the system in a meaningful way? And also the courage to say, that voice is so critical in our work as well, the lived and living experience voice, and the courage to really listen to, the challenges, and to not be so set in your own, belief that you can problem solve your way out of things. I once had a colleague from the US ask me when I was doing community change work in my home community, is it about changing the community or preserving your job? And that is such a gut and courageous question, right? And it's one of those ones where you just think, okay, what is it that I'm really trying to accomplish here? And I think those are the things that I think about when I think about this work. Yeah, I think we're aligned in many ways, but also there are some nuances as well. Okay, so you've been with us a month at Tamarack. So it's always great that folks who are new to an organization bring some new perspectives. And so what would some of those perspectives be?
So I took this question again, sort of kind of from a personal lens. So I'll just go with it because that's what's coming to mind for me. I thought about it in terms of aspects of my identity, because that really shapes perspectives that I bring. And I've done a lot of work over the last couple of years to see the linkage between where I've been and my identity and the perspectives I bring. So I'm a Jew of Polish and Ukrainian ancestry, and I'm a settler here in Canada via the US. I think this gives me perspective on what is uncommon and unique about this network with the fresh eyes, and maybe on the opportunities to build a cross-nation movement for social change. There are nuances, like you said, but there's a lot of similarity that I see across what collectively we aspire for. I think it also gives me perspective on the need for people-centered workplaces. I left Utah in 2015, and when I had to leave, my boss and my organization were amazing. They supported me to work remotely from, I think it's 3,000 miles away and 2 time zones away before working remote was really a thing. They supported me to adjust my role within the organization temporarily when I experienced pregnancy losses and then ultimately had my kids. I think I bring a perspective that part of building back better from COVID looks like reimagining workplaces, work locations, work hours, and roles to match people's complex and beautiful lives and aspirations and talents, that recognize that the experiences we have outside of work roles can really positively shape our work if we create spaces for those roles. I'm also a mom, as I mentioned, and I'm navigating how to nurture and adore, but also build independence and resilience into amazing young boys. This gives me perspective on what it's like to be in our health and school and social services systems, albeit with a lot of privilege, a lot more privilege than most have. It gives me daily perspectives on how to both celebrate the amazing people who work in those systems and agitate for changes to those systems so that they even better benefit all of our kids. I am a white, able-bodied woman with many, many privileges. This gives me perspectives and obligation, I believe, to share power, to model openness and humility, to be constantly learning, to try to step back or step forward as the movement or the group I'm in partnership with or the context requires, and to try to use my network and my platform for justice and reconciliation and equity. The last thing I'll say is that I am a former local backbone. I've designed partnership meetings. I've tried to work on communicating within partnerships and with the partnership to the broader community. I've worked with data. I've supported state and county level policy change, and I've coordinated the inner workings of backbone organizations. I had the chance to work in one place for a decade and to see a partnership grow from infancy to real maturity. And I hope that all of this gives me grounding in some of the complexity of local partnership work, of how long it can take, of how critical it is to celebrate progress, and in how we have to navigate these tensions between bringing people along and doing disruptive work that is inevitably uncomfortable and might not be work that everyone wants to come along to. I think it brings me perspective on how much we've learned and continue to learn about what it takes to move outcomes at scale. And mostly, it really shapes my desire to center Liz, our learners and our members in everything we do. I'm just really looking forward to working with the amazing team that I've joined to understand and amplify and resource and advocate for the work that's happening in the communities that we partner with and with the learners that we partner with.
That's really lovely, and I think it is a little bit of a challenging question, but you've answered it beautifully in terms of just a month. It's a month of really intensive learning that you've gone through. So just building on some of your additional perspectives and thinking about trends that we're facing. What are some of the trends that you think are facing these collaborative tables, particularly because the work of community change and community impact is really challenging?
So before I speak to the trends, I just have to thank our colleagues, Liz. I got to spend my first meeting this morning was with our Communities Building Youth Futures team and most of our amazing Learning Center coaches. Talking about some of what they're seeing in Communities Building Youth Futures. And that conversation really helped me shape some of this thinking. So thank you all for doing the work to have that and to invite me into it. One trend that I heard there and that I've seen elsewhere is around sustainability. Sustainability of financial resources, of talent, of people's health, of their energy. It's interesting to me. I really do think, and I think the research shows this, we have enough resources in this world for everyone, but they're not yet deployed to equitably so that everyone has what they need. And I think what we see as one of the results of that is that many collaborative tables are seeking financial resources to sustain their shared work. And not just that, but also to activate their really transformational ideas. Many collaborative tables are thinking about how to sustain the participation of members when people lead complex lives and when we're having to do some of our partnering over computers, absent the joys of shared meals, of unplanned conversations, and just human connections that are easier to have happen face to face. So sustainability is one. Another trend is around the brand of this movement. I still meet so many people who are unsatisfied with how things are, who are hungry to contribute to a more just world, but who aren't sure where to start. I think we have a brand awareness issue, because I think we could be their starting place, all of us here on this call who are part of this movement. I'm excited for those of us who believe that collaborative leadership tables can impact change at scale, to work together, to share the why of what we do, the result we feel accountable for, and the many, many opportunities that folks have to join this work and be part of the change they want to see. I see a real appetite across the US and Canada to bring millions more people into understanding, talking about, and contributing to collaborative tables that center result and lived experience. Finally, I see a trend that brings me so much hope. I've been in this place-based work for some time, and I think in the last few years, I've seen more and more, I've seen critical mass of people in this work doing work that puts more resources with groups impacted by our current systems. More and more people are designing leadership tables around existing grassroots efforts, around youth, around Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and the amazing work they've been doing for generations. More and more white settlers who hold institutional power are reflecting on how they use that power and making choices that really center equity. In terms of how we navigate these trends, for me, it comes down to a mindset of shared humanity. We all share the same sky. We are all experiencing a warming world, albeit in disproportionate ways. Our education systems that fail students impacted by poverty, that aren't working for rural students, that aren't working for students of color, or for students who speak English as their third, fourth, or seventh language. These have impacts on all of us. And I really wonder what would happen if all of us recognize that our destinies are tied together and then made decisions that reflect what would be best for those who are currently least well served.
Yeah, because indeed they are tied together, right? Our destinies are tied together. I think you're absolutely right about that. Hey, so the final question that we have, we're going to jump over the reflection question just to give you a bit of a heads up around that, Danya. But this is the final question we're going to pose to you before we open it up to the other questions that folks are hopefully going to put either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. And I know Mallory will get back to your question. Tamarack has this co-CEO model, which is kind of unique, but we're seeing it emerge more and more. The board was unanimous in its support of continuing the model. So from a shared leadership perspective, what attracted you to a co-CEO role? Because your previous role was Chief Operating Officer. So what attracted you to this idea?
I'll just mention two things. And the first one is that, to me, your leadership model represents what I've tried to support communities and individual companies and organizations and government agencies to do. It's an example of doing externally what we coach externally. I was really fortunate at my previous job to work with a CEO and a leadership team that embraced shared leadership. And the experience of being in regular thought partnership with my boss in a very honest, open way, not over time, and with my team, and seeing the changes to population level results that contributed to, made me realize that Tamarack's really bold and formalized approach to sharing leadership was one I really wanted to try out. There's one other reason too. I love my work. I also love my family, and there's other things in my life that I love. And I know that the shared leadership model will give me space to ebb and flow in my efforts over these years and years and years that are hopefully ahead of us. And hopefully to sustain my contributions to this work as long as they're needed. Liz, you were so amazing last week. It was March break, and I was in week 3 or week 4 of this role. And my kids were home, and you encouraged me to take time off to be with them. 3 or 4 weeks into a job, and you encouraged me to take a pause so that I could be in my non-Tamarack roles, and you covered for some things for me so that I could do that. And that is a real gift, and I can't wait to do that for you when you're seeking a moment for your non-Tamarack roles. And I think it's a way, perhaps, of recognizing that we all do have complex lives. We all do have things outside of work, and we might not be able to give the same level of effort every single day of every single year. How about you? How do you define it, and what do you think is unique and good about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it enables us to leverage the best of both people and the team, and to do things unique. I think that Tamarack is in many ways, as you said, a learner-centered organization or a partner-centered organization. And this allows us to have, as co-CEOs, that opportunity to connect directly with partners in the work and learn from them and experience the joys and the stress that they feel, but also bring that back to the organization, and for us understand, the role of community change. So it doesn't feel like it's an academic approach. It feels like it's grounded in work. And like, it's not my life's passion to read financial statements, as interesting as they are. Being able to have the time for that knowledge and that sharing and being in the community space is such a gift. And I think it's really what for me, the co-CEO model enables for both of us and for the organization. And then, when we engage with our staff team, we also are in the space that they're in, and it makes it more real for us as well. So yeah, there's lots of reciprocal benefits, I think, to it. And it's also really good to have a colleague that, there are good times and bad times in every organization, and to have a trusted colleague to be able to say, hey, this is a rough patch that we're going through. It was particularly true for us during the pandemic. And I'm sure that was what you experienced in Salt Lake as well. But to say, oh, what are we going to do together, and not to have to bear the burden of that. And then, to turn to our team and bring them in on the conversation as well. Yeah, it just felt like, support was there. Okay, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, and there's a couple of questions in the Q&A panel, but I want to bring Grace back in, because Grace, you've been monitoring both the chat and the Q&A panel. So what have you been seeing happening, or what are the questions that are coming up?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Liz. And I just wanted to say, Danya, it was really great to hear you speak on the different elements and the different approaches that you have. So that was very insightful, even for myself, and I'm sure other people feel inspired by that. I see 2 questions in the Q&A, and again, we welcome people continue to ask questions throughout. The first question comes from Bree, and it is, what is one thing I can do starting tomorrow that can make the biggest impact in your opinion?
Wow, thank you for that question, Bree. I would say, like, I guess I go back to Liz, your point on context, and your question just makes me so curious about what your context is, and what opportunities you see, and what the result is that you're trying to get to. So what I would offer is start with that. Figure out what the transforming result, what the audacious goal is that you have, and then back from there to figure out why it's not true yet, or why it hasn't been realized yet, and what it might take and who it might take to get there. And the fact that you asked the question makes me believe that you likely have lots of insights already within you about what the answers are. So I would say, follow your intuitions, follow the insights that you're offering yourself as you do that work.
Just building on that before we go to the next question, David Crislip, who's written the Collaborative Leadership Field book, asked the question, what makes leadership difficult on that issue, right? Which is, I think, connected to this. It's also, what are you seeing? What's your context? But why is what you're seeing in your context not working right now, or what is making it unsatisfied for you, and what's what's challenging the leaders in the place. That, and leaders are leaders from all perspectives, right? So I when I think about leadership, I think about it in all sorts of different kinds of venues. But I love that question: what is making leadership difficult? Over to you, Grace.
Amazing. Yeah, I appreciate that comment, those comments as well. We have another question from Carissa, and the question is there a co-CEO model toolkit or framework available to help guide implementation?
Liz, go for it. I'll follow you this time.
So we did uncover some articles on Bridgespan around co-CEO models. There isn't a lot written. And so Danya, even in your early days at Tamarack, you were saying, hey, we should do some writing about this and some reflection on this. And I do think, it was in Canada, we're certainly seeing the model emerge. And I think I take your point, Danya, where you said you worked very in close partnership with the CEO of the United Way of Salt Lake. You see that a lot, right? And so I think there are a lot more examples than we realize of, senior leaders working very closely together to advance, but co-CEOs are a little different, I think. And so it's a real opportunity for us. But if what we'll do in the post email that we're sending out, Grace, maybe what we can do is include a couple of links to some articles and some resources that we shared with our board when they were making the decision about, a single CEO or continuing the co-CEO model. Danya, what do you think? What have you seen?
I wish I could remember the organization, but as I was thinking about joining Tamarack and really reflecting on how do I want to be going into this initial phase of working together with someone in a way that was new to me, I had a colleague send me a link to an organization that has a 4 co-ED model. So I'll surface that, Grace. I can't remember the name right now, but there's a lovely blog post describing some of the process that organization went through to come to that structure, and then talking about, if I'm remembering correctly, how they make decisions within that structure. And Liz, I think we should take an action item from this conversation to continue to think about what we could offer about the learning that you and Paul have already done, and that you and I will be doing together with our team.
Absolutely. Grace, do we have any questions that came out of the chat, or have we exhausted our questions?
Yeah, there seems like there is 2 more. It might be a 2-parter.
Okay.
So I'll throw that your way. Again, this is from Jody and Andrea. So thank you guys for your questions. So the first part of it is, I'm new to a leadership role as part of CBYF in my community. What advice would you give for a new emerging leader? So that's the first part. And then the second part, which also relates, comes from Andrea. She's asking you, Danya, more specifically, you mentioned you can only do so much. May I ask what you personally do when you hit a barrier in conversation or move forward within a project that allows you to accept this advice in a way that you still feel heard and not discouraged? So that is a 2-part, and I can repeat any of that if need be.
Thanks, Grace. Jody, I would say, first of all, congratulations, welcome. And I hope you find it a lot of fun. My advice would be I would go back to this theme of curiosity that's been coming up in this conversation. Ask a lot of questions, try to understand what brings the people that you're going to be in partnership with to the work, what their personal passions are, what aspects of their day-to-day work they feel most excited about, what success would look like for them. What do they see is true about the ecosystem that you're working in? I think curiosity and information collection first is my first bit of advice. And then I would say, I'm working on this, so I'm offering this to myself as I offer it to you. Try to also carve the time out to synthesize what you're learning, and to make meaning of it, and to think about how you want it to shape the way that you're going to show up as a partner to your community, and a partner to the team that you're working with. I created, this was advice I got from a good friend, but I created this list of I am statements, and there's 12 of them that I've created, and I also keep them up here on this wall, and they remind me of how I want to be doing the work every day. And that was something that came out of that curiosity and that listening, and then out of the synthesis of what I was hearing that I did, and it was really powerful. I went on too long with that question. I'll be brief for Liz on this next one. When I hit a barrier, what allows me to accept the advice in a way where I still feel heard and not discouraged? I remind myself that sometimes things aren't going to happen right away. Sometimes you may not feel like things are heard right away, but that doesn't mean that they might not happen later, or they might not be heard later. I try to hold on to what I think is critically important. And if it doesn't get traction in that moment, save it for another point when I'm in the right headspace to bring it back, and when the group that I'm in partnership with, might find it useful. So just to put it aside, but not to give up on it, just to know that it might not be the right moment.
Hey, so thank you so much, Danya. We're coming to the end of our time, and we want to respect that everybody on the call has other places to go, but thank you. This has been so wonderful to be in conversation with you, but also to really get listen to your thoughtful reflections on how you approach leadership, but also what you're seeing across the work that you're doing and the perspectives that you're bringing, and also some of the trends. I now will take a few minutes just to thank everybody else for being on the call. We have many events coming up at Tamarack. We have a whole raft of webinars that will be coming up. We do webinars on Wednesdays, so lots of different topics, and we invite you to go to the Tamarack website and register for other webinars. But we also have a number of workshops and online learning courses that we provide, and we'd really like to share with you an institute that we will be hosting on May 5th, 12th, and 19th. And so if you want to build your skill sets and your mindsets around community change, this will be an opportunity to do that with a whole variety of colleagues who are also engaged in this work, because sometimes it can feel a little bit isolating and a little bit lonely, even though we're partnering with so many people. You know, it can, we use the Community Change Institute as a way of building community amongst change makers. And so we invite you to think a little bit more